ambition, excellence, drive. All of these things on the surface are very good, things that I would use to describe myself. But when does excellence become an idol that can steal your peace, your relationships, and your soul? That's what we're going to work through today. Welcome back to Don't Waste the Chaos. I'm your host, Kerri Roberts. I've spent the last 20 years working in HR and people operations, and now I own my own consulting firm. I'm an entrepreneur and a podcaster. And actually, today, I'm recording this episode on a day that actually my 100th episode launched. So if you're listening to this, I'm recording this on December 8th of 2025. My 100th episode launched today, and less than 10% of podcasts make it to 100 episodes. Only 1% of podcasters make it past the 6-month mark. And so if you're tuning into this episode, I would freaking love it if you would push pause and go subscribe on YouTube or wherever you're listening, Spotify or Apple. Please subscribe to the show. It's the only way that I can get this show in the hands of other people who are working hard in their life and giving it their all and trying to focus on growth. And so I would love it if you would subscribe. If you've never left me a review, please do that. 100 episodes in, I launched this show in January of 2024. I have not missed an episode launching on a Tuesday since the show's inception, and I don't plan to. I love podcasting. It's so fun. That's not what we're talking about today, but goodness sakes, I do my podcast with excellence. So we are going to jump into that today. I want to talk to you about this because this is something that I've worked on striking a balance with my entire career. If you've ever heard me say the scripture before, it's one of my favorites. Everything you do it as if you're doing it for the Lord and not for man. I was just doing a public speaking engagement last week. I was talking to about 160 leaders, and I was talking about giving it your all. And I essentially told them, I wanted them to get a lot out of it that day, but I was doing my best because I care about using the skills and the abilities that God has given me. And I know that that means I'm going to bring my A game and they're going to get a lot out of it, but I'm not necessarily doing it to impress them. I'm doing it because it's what I'm called to do. It's what I'm capable of doing, and I'm not going to do any less. But there's a shadow side to that, right? If you're a type A, highly driven person like I am, I'm an Enneagram 3, I'm a manifesting generator, if you know human design. And this sometimes means that we get a little upside down in our work, right? Working long hours, pushing hard, but this comes at a cost. Burnout, relational stress, loss of meaning. And I'd say the most upside down I ever got in my career, and there's been a few examples, but probably the biggest time that I ever got upside down, I was working at a private insurance brokerage. And when I got hired on to that organization, one of the owners, one of the 4 partners was like, "You're going to make more money here than you've ever made." And that really appealed to me because I was ready in my life to get to the next level. I took a chief operating officer role there, and my pay was attached to the bottom line. I saw pretty quickly that their bottom line was skewed. They paid their partnership team in a unique way, which meant that there weren't a lot of dollars spitting out the end, but it was a very, very successful organization, had been around for well over 100 years, but it was going to be almost impossible for me to make as much as I'd ever had made in my life, which was what was sold to me at the beginning. And so what I could have done is skewed the game based on metrics and won. But what I saw was they weren't doing systematic reviews, which means they weren't doing regular increases for their people. They were doing more of a bestowing gifts onto their people versus actually making them systematic and equitable based on performance and things that we actually wanted to base raises and bonuses on. And so I saw pretty quickly on I was going to have to negotiate, and I did negotiate. I got to a little bit better of a place, but I kept thinking, if I do X, Y, and Z, I'm going to get that payout. I'm going to make it happen for myself. I am an executive. I need to bring this level of overworking, honestly, to the table. And this is what executives do. Executives get drivers because they don't have time to drive their kids around because they're driving numbers instead. Executives have nannies. Executives get a little fluffy around the middle because of all of the happy hours they're doing and the eating out and the snacking or the not eating all day long and then eating like crap at night and then drinking my dinner sometimes because I was so stressed out. I was prioritizing my work above almost everything else. And if you're watching, I'm smiling, but it's tongue in cheek because it was a mess. I was 50 pounds heavier. I wasn't sleeping well. I was exhausted and I was growing bitter. And honestly, all of that led to my demise. I was giving all that I had. And I was giving more than was even being asked of me, to be honest. But it's what I thought the organization needed and what that title demanded, because I had it in my mind. I'd watched leaders rise among the ranks for so long in my career, for 20 years at that point, or I guess 15 years at that point. And there were so many leaders that had gotten to that level, but didn't perform at that level. And I was constantly disheartened. How do people get to these high level roles that aren't qualified, that aren't growing, that aren't focused on process improvement and professional development and continuous learning? And I had built this vision of what an executive really should be to be truly committed and worthy of the role. And gosh dang, I stepped all the way into that. And, we were flying private at the time and jet setting and really doing a lot of things, but I was completely out of balance and I had lost a lot of meaning in my life. So what we're going to do today is explore the fine line between godly excellence and the idolatry of achievement. I want to help you and I discern when ambition serves and when ambition really enslaves us. We're going to define excellence. We're going to examine the psychological and cultural pressures to driving us to be always on. I want to show some data on the human and business cost of overwork. And we're going to dive into scripture to frame true excellence and give some practical red flags and guardrails for you as a leader or an employee or a business owner. So I'm excited for this episode. It hits very close to home. Since I launched my business, I've been calling it the downshift or the great unraveling. I've been untangling. I've used all of these terms about my journey the last 2.5, almost 3 years into my firm, Salt and Light Advisors. And I'm not done yet, but I've made a ton of progress in it. So let me set this biblical foundation stage. God calls us to do our best, to work with integrity, to be good stewards, to be diligent. So excellence is not inherently wrong. It makes sense. If you're going to do your best, if you're going to work with integrity, if you're going to be a good steward, if you're going to be diligent, excellence makes sense. Like, for instance, scripture celebrates wise and diligent people. It celebrates craftsmanship. It rewards responsible stewardship and doing all things, like I mentioned, as unto the Lord. So excellence in leadership, excellence in HR in my world, excellence in business operations, building processes, leading teams well, pursuing growth, stewardship over our resources, servant leadership, and competence, they all make sense when it comes to this. And there are healthy markers of good excellence, clarity of our purpose, healthy boundaries, which is a place that I was really upside down in and I've been working on. Sustainable pace, because we are finite. We are limited individuals. We were built this way by God. That's not a sin to be finite or to have limits. That's actually the way that we were built. So having a sustainable pace actually makes a ton of sense and is the way that we were hardwired. Using collaboration, which would also mean delegation, rest cycles, growth, and capacity building, not just output. And then alignment with our values. These are all very important. And those are healthy markers of good excellence. But a lot of times we forget about that. When we're thinking about excellence in business, how many times are you thinking that means clarity of your purpose, that means good boundaries, that means a sustainable pace, that means collaboration and delegation, that means rest? Capacity building, not just what your output is, alignment with your values. I think so many times when we're thinking of excellence, we're not thinking of those things. I'm thinking about hitting my financial goals, hitting my milestones, hitting my markers, moving my rocks, my pebbles, like whatever, whether you're reading Traction by Gino Wickham or, like what book you're following, that's what I've always pictured. And so I've been working on this for years now, and I just want to walk through what it is I've been learning. So if excellence is good, where does the line blur into something potentially damaging? I've seen it over and over again. So that's what we're going to get in today. When excellence becomes idolatry, we're going to talk about the dangers. And of course, if you know me, we're going to talk about the data as well. So I want to introduce the concept of workaholism. We all know this one, right? And I would say years ago, I would be like, oh, my husband and I were both, workaholics. And I just want to pause at that and say, that's not okay. And that's not something that I wish I would have described myself as for years. I'm no longer a workaholic. I'm not a recovering workaholic. I think that's an ugly phrase and something I don't want to have anything to do with. Overwork, toxic productivity. Workaholism is increasingly recognized as a serious risk. And statistically, a pooled meta-analysis across 23 countries found 15.2% of workers meet the criteria for workaholism. And that was definitely me. There's also a health and organizational cost when it comes to this. Overworking without rest or balance is, of course, linked to stress, burnout, mental health decline, lower productivity over time, absenteeism, and turnover. So that is wild. And for me, mental health decline also, that was talking about bitterness. For me, I was maxed, not relaxed, and declining. And I was also getting bitter against the people around me that weren't performing at my level. Here are the mental health realities for this. Globally, depression, anxiety, and stress are often, of course, exacerbated by overwork. This costs economies and organizations heavily. There's a psychological underpinning to this, the phenomenon of productivity fetishization. So this is a fetish that we've got where self-worth and identity are becoming entangled with our output and our success. This leads to chronic dissatisfaction. We're never happy with ourselves. We're never happy with where the organization is at. It leads to guilt during rest. I'm still trying to figure this out. If I'm sitting and somebody walks into my house, even my husband that I've been with for 17 years, I have an extremely strong urge to jump up and go do something. And like, what in the world is that? My husband's not like, hey girl, get up, like go to work. Like that's not what he's doing. He's pretty good about sitting and taking a rest. So that's pretty wild. Chronic dissatisfaction, guilt during rest, inability to disengage, inability to turn off, internal pressures we put on ourselves, impaired relationships, of course, whether it's our marriage, our friendships with our children, and declined spiritual health because we are not taking the time that we need to in that area. So when excellence, career, work, or productivity become our God, and when I say become our God, that means the center of our identity, where we place our value and where we find our security. So when excellence, career, work, or productivity become our God rather than a tool or our calling, this is a problem. That shift transforms a very good gift into an idol. And that's where we want to start walking away. So let me jump into a little bit of a biblical perspective here, what scripture says about idolatry and true excellence. So let me call out a few different scriptures around this area. Exodus 23 says, you shall have no other gods before me. This command applies. This is one of the perfect 10, right? One of the 10 commandments. This command applies beyond idols of stone. I think, so many times we might read our Bible and we think like, well, I don't have a gold idol sitting in my house, but anything that takes God's place, money, success, or work can become an idol. Colossians 3:23 says, and this is the verse I was talking about earlier, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord, but not for men. Excellence as worship to God, but making sure that the motivation is God and not self or status, which is what I was caught up in before. I was certainly living in a big fat house and my kid went to private school and I went to the most expensive country club and that private school was the most expensive. And I drove an M series BMW X7 and my husband had, ordering a new Corvette and we were doing the thing, flying private. We were doing the thing. We were doing it a lot of times for status. Now, I was doing it because I felt like I was worth it and that I am capable of being a millionaire. But to me, and which I am, but like to me, I was doing it for the wrong reasons. The Bible consistently warns that idols, even invisible ones like wealth, ambition, and self-worth, mislead and ultimately fail us. And I've got to say, I had the title and all of the things, and I was horribly unhealthy, horribly out of balance, and self-loathing. There is a call to rest and to the Sabbath. And this is something that I've always like really tried. I wanted to do it right. Just as much as I want to do work right and everything else, I've wanted to do the Sabbath right. I want to do it exactly right. But God established rest, meaning sustainable rhythms that matter. He established that for us. It's not another rule for us to live by. Like I need to do it right. And what exact day and how many exact hours. And should I spent some time in Israel. We couldn't even push elevator buttons on the Sabbath. And there was a drip coffee maker instead of the coffee machine that could make us a cappuccino because you had to push the buttons. Like there was just so many things that becomes legalistic and rule based. God established it for our rest, for the rhythm of our life, because we are finite. Because we have limits, not to give us another rule that we need to live by. Integrity, stewardship, and using God's gifts for God's glory. This is excellent, rooted in our identity in Christ, not performance-based worth. And that's a huge differentiator. Really, it comes down to our motives and our intents. So here are some questions that I would pose to you, and these would be great journal prompts. And I'll try to list these in the show notes because I would love it if you would do these journal prompts. Just a fun hack, by the way. I do journal prompts in AI now. And so I've actually got a chat called Journal, and I'll say like, here's the journal prompt that I'm questioning myself with, and then I'll just talk my way through it. I might talk for 5 or 10 minutes, and then it will reflect back to me what patterns it's seeing. Not like psychological, it's not my therapist, but it'll help me draw upon data and different scriptures and do an interpretation of, where I'm coming from and how I got there and what could be healthier. So here are your reflection questions to ponder. What is your first love? And your calendar can tell you this. A lot of different things can tell you this, but are your first loves God, or is your first love in this case performance or identity through your work or through your motherhood or through your homemaking? Does everything have to be perfect? Do you rest because God commanded it, or is it only because you have a little space in between tasks and so you're able to do it? And I question myself on that. Like I take a walk. Is it because of a vanity metric? Is it because of my mental health? Is it because I know and I have a value on rest and I deserve rest because I'm human? Is success building your worth, or is your worth already secured in Christ? I've said so many times, my reputation is in the Lord, but is it really? Who am I trying to impress or please? So let's talk about some practical guardrails, how leaders and professionals can walk in healthy excellence. This is where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty and some of the things that I've been working on. I would recommend that you define success metrics beyond your output. Include your health, include relationships, rest, spiritual growth, team growth if you have a team. So defining those metrics beyond your output. Next, establish rhythms of rest and Sabbath, weekly, yearly, and then life seasons. Don't let work dictate your identity or your value or your ability to establish these rhythms. One of the things that I've been doing first is blocking off in my calendar. And this is something I never thought I'd actually do. And I love it. I'm blocking off in my calendar one day a month. I start out with this. I go to St. Louis. I live about an hour and a half from St. Louis. And I go to St. Louis and I see my Reiki healer. I block off time to go to a coffee shop. I do a little shopping. Sometimes I grab lunch with a girlfriend. I get a massage at the Four Seasons. I also book a monthly massage in my local town. I've got a girl that is an excellent massage therapist right here in my little town. I block that off for 90 minutes. And then I block off my nail appointments every 2 to 3 weeks. And so I block those times off while I'm blocking off my child's school schedule and the calendar, so that way I can make sure that I'm contributing to either picking up or dropping off, and of course, all of his games, sports, everything that he's involved in. And I block off church. So I've got all of those things going on. I block off my family vacations for the whole year, time that I'm going to spend with my mom, time that I'm going to do girlfriend trips, which we try to do once a quarter, where I get away with two of my best friends. I block all of that off. And then I block off my client work, my podcasting, my business development, all of those type of things. So those rhythms and rest are really important. The next thing we can do are create some healthy boundaries and delegation, building our structures, of course, our processes and shared responsibilities. I want to avoid being the single hero. For me, I don't have a active like W-2 team right now. I have in the past. I've shifted away from that. I've moved into automations. And actually, right after I record this podcast, I'm going to have a meeting with one of my business coaches that focuses on my tech stack and all of my automations. I'm working on building out Zaps and different things like that. So that way I'm using my automations effectively and I'm not doing those repeat tasks. Like I have different GPTs that I've built inside of OpenAI, all of these things that I've done so I can have healthy boundaries and some delegation. Delegation doesn't have to mean that you have a team. You can delegate with contractors. You can delegate with your tech tools. Next is your accountability in your community, engaging trusted peers, partners, and of course, for me, my faith community. This allows others to speak truth into our ambitions. Two of my best friends are both stay-at-home moms. And that's an interesting one for me. At first I thought like, oh, they don't get me in, my work in the same way. That's actually really healthy for me. First of all, they don't think I'm cool because I am a business owner. They don't think I'm cool because I work all the time. They're like, when do we get together? And of course, they're very busy as well with their kids and volunteering at their schools. They travel, they pickleball, they've got things going on themselves. They're very busy. They manage their households. They're the CEO of their households. But that has been really healthy for me. And also having other fellow business owners that I work with and, talking honestly about our work capacity, our work schedules, and how we're balancing that. Accountability in that community is huge. Next are regular self check-ins, looking at our motivations and our heart posture. I recently did a talk on the 4 cores of credibility, which I pull from Stephen M. R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust. I'll link it in the show notes. I link it all the time. It's such a good book, but it talks about our motives and our intentions. Why are we doing what we're doing? I just saw a therapist the other day on TikTok, and she said one of the first questions she asks a new client is, what car do you drive and why? Like, how did you end up with that car? And I thought that was very interesting. She said it's a pretty benign, but really insightful question that she asks new clients because it helps her to see their motives and their intent. Why am I doing this? Why do I have the job that I have? Why are my financial goals what they are? For what? For whom? What am I trying to serve here? And here's a little peek behind the curtain for me. I have struggled with enjoying the money that I make. So I've said before, like, I know I'm worthy of millions. I'm worthy of what I've built. I'm worthy of what I continue to make. I'm worthy of my pricing structure. I just increased my prices for 2026 and I am worthy of that. I know how much time it takes. I know how it pulls into my 20 years of experience, my bachelor's, my master's, and all of that. I know how much faster I can get to clients and solve their needs than a new entry-level HR person could. So I know all of my worth. I'm pulling in this revenue. And then I was constantly thinking about like giving it all away. And I'm not saying that generosity isn't good, but it's like I felt guilty about what I was making. And this is something that my husband and I have both struggled with. I grew up very humbly on a farm. My husband grew up in a trailer park and then was homeless at 15. And so we've both had this insatiable desire for more, to make more, but then we don't really sit in that. We're like, well, we have to invest it smart and not spend it on ourselves and then give it away and, be really generous with others. And it's like, why do we not think that God thinks we're not worthy of that? Is it bad? And is money inherently bad? Are we called to enjoyment in this life? Are we not? So those check-ins on our motivations and our heart posture is very, very important for us to reflect. And you know what? The answers change over time and our motivations change over time. And that reflection is very important. The sixth thing that I want to point out as far as a tool or practice to help you walk in healthy excellence is leading people, not just producing output. So as a leader, and specifically for me as an HR leader, prioritizing my clients' well-beings, their employees' well-beings, not just business metrics, because people are not productivity machines, even though I've driven myself that way for many years. It's just not reality. People end up hating their life and hating their jobs, and then they leave ultimately. So as a reminder, those 6 tools or practices I mentioned: defining success metrics beyond your output, establishing rhythms of rest and Sabbath weekly, yearly, based on our life seasons. Like right now, my motherhood, I've got a child who's about to be 14. The third is healthy boundaries and delegation. The fourth, accountability and community. Fifth, regular self check-ins on our motivation and our heart posture. And then 6, leading people, not just producing output. So for business leaders, we need to design roles, create expectations, clarify expectations, and create KPIs that honor rest, human dignity, meaning recognizing our finitude and our limits, sustainable work versus hustle culture, building feedback loops around burnout, overload, and our mental and our spiritual health. That is what is going to get us into the next season. So I just want us to take some time really to think and pause, because I know you're probably listening to this episode, and as soon as you get done with it, you're either on to the next consumable podcast, you're driving to your next appointment or your next meeting or to pick up your kid or whatever you're doing. And so many times we don't actually take the time to think about this. And so while I've got you on here, I'd love for you to think about a time where you crossed the line from healthy excellence into idolatry. What did it cost you? And how did you regain balance? One of the stories that comes up in my mind, I was working for a mortgage company and I had been kind of struggling. So I should back up a little bit. I was told that I likely would never have children of my own years and years ago, before I ever met my husband. I was in a previous relationship and I was told that I would probably need a sapingogram, which is a procedure where they essentially force fluids through your lady parts, because I had a lot of clouding from ovarian cysts. They had thought that I had maybe PCOS. I'd had multiple ovarian cysts. They had ruptured. I was struggling with a lot of different things. And so at the time I thought, well, we'll just see what God has to say about that. I was in my early 20s. I wasn't even ready to have kids anyway. And so I kind of shelved that. It was in the back of my mind. Don't get me wrong, but I kind of shelved it. And I was a career woman. So I was like, maybe it's just not for me. I meet my husband, and at the time that I met him as a friend, he had kids that were 5 and 11. And so I was like, well, I don't know, maybe my calling is to be a step parent and not to have biological children of my own. So I kind of shelved that. Well, when my husband and I got married, he had known my situation, and we were like, we won't necessarily try for children. We won't necessarily prevent. We'll just see how it goes. Well, 6 months after we got married, I found out I was pregnant. Very surprised. And if I'm just being completely candid, and sometimes this is offensive for people to hear, but I was not excited. And I wasn't even really grateful at first. I was just like, wow, this wasn't in my plan, and I am a planner. Okay. I like to have a plan. And my husband was pumped, which is funny because when I first met him, he was like, I'm not planning on having any more kids anyway. I don't even have full custody of my own, so we were kind of on the same page. Like, we'll just see how it goes, but probably not. So he was all of a sudden very excited. And I was like, I don't know what this looks like. So essentially I just was pregnant, and I was still working, doing my thing. And I immediately started looking for a nanny, because I thought, I don't necessarily want him to be in childcare. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. She kind of impressed upon us, not in a judgmental way, but that was just an amazing way to be raised. And I wanted to work. So I thought I would find a nanny. And so I posted for a nanny. I ended up finding one. She was a game changer. I still love her dearly to this day, because she mothered my child with me at the beginning. And honestly, she was like a sister wife to me. She took such great care, took great care of my home, took great care of our health, helped meal prep for us. And of course, took excellent care of our child. Well, when he was about a year, we put him into a daycare facility and started doing some preschool type things, some developmental type things, and loved it there. And then after a couple of years there, I had learned about Montessori. I'd never heard of that. I grew up in a very small town. I was living in a larger city and heard about Montessori, and I just was like captivated by the concept. So we moved him over into Montessori. And fast forward, it's the summer before he goes to elementary school. And I started thinking, I have never thought about staying at home with him. And now he's going to go into school and then I'll never stay at home with him, probably. I mean, I'm not saying that you can't. There's lots of my friends that are moms that do stay at home after their kiddos go to school. But I was like, wow, I can't imagine staying at home once he goes to school. I'd probably go back to work then. And I've never paused. Well, right around that time, my grandpa died. And I took some time away to be with my family during that time. He died of cancer and left behind my grandma, and they're next door neighbors with my parents. And so, I was very close to him, an excellent man. And I took some time. And while I was away, I was like, wow, my work situation is really unhealthy. I had a female leader I was working for, and she was not a woman of Christian faith. She was a spiritual woman, but not a woman of Christian faith. And she would sometimes mock Christian faith, not mine per se, but just Christian faith in general. One of the owners of this organization is a huge Jesus follower, very devout in his faith. And she would kind of mock people like, oh, people are Christians to get closer to this guy, which could have been maybe true, but certainly wasn't true in my case. I had come to know Christ as a child and had a very strong relationship myself. And she was a dark spirit to me, to be honest. And she made me a little bit nervous and was kind of questioning me. And she knew that I believed that I could do her role. Now, that was kind of in my ignorance. I was quite a bit younger than her, and that was maybe immature thinking. And I was very respectful to her as a mentor, but she knew that that was my goal, to eventually be the senior leader of HR. And I believed that I was working hard enough to get there, and because I was, but she was always kind of dark toward me. Well, she calls me in for a meeting and I tell her, I'm thinking about my work. I'm thinking about my balance. I'm thinking about how much time I'm spending and being a mother. And within seconds, she calls another person into the office, and essentially for them to witness my termination, I guess is what she was thinking. I found myself completely shocked at where the conversation went. She turned on me. She didn't want me on her team. I could immediately see, it was like the veil tore for me. I could see with clarity that she was pouncing on me. She wanted me out of her organization. And at first I thought it was because she felt betrayed because I wasn't truly in. And then over time I realized, oh my gosh, she just doesn't want me here and this is her out. We parted ways that day. It was earth shattering for me. It was earth shattering because that role was my identity. I was the director of human resources. I led all of training and development. I led the e-learning team. I led performance management. I had a lot of responsibilities with internal communications, culture, wellness, a lot of different things in this organization. And I was taken aback. It was the first time in my life that I had a panic attack. It was the first time in my life where I did not see a path forward. It was a dark night of the soul for me. And this individual tried to walk through it with me, which was bananas because she was a horrible human being to me during this time, but she wanted to control the narrative. And she knew that I had a lot of power around the way all of this went down. Long story short, I was like, hey, I just wanted to work from home maybe a little bit. I wanted to step back just a little bit. I didn't want to go away entirely. So I was told that I'd be able to work from home and would get paid to work from home. They did pay me for a year. They didn't assign me anything. And it made me feel worthless. I felt horrible. I've always wanted to earn what I was making. I know people that don't act that way, but for me, I want to bring value. I don't want to be on someone's P&L not bringing value. It's important that I live with integrity and honesty, and I sleep better at night knowing that I've worked really hard for what I make. And that I don't take for granted, that I've been, since I've been in my 20s, I've been a 6-figure earner. I'm in my 40s now, so I've come a lot further than that. But, at the time, I took that so freaking seriously. And so it made me feel horrible about myself, even though I feel like I deserve to be compensated for what I brought to the table in that organization and all of the things I built. They were essentially paying me royalties for what I'd created, but it made me feel horrible. And I had an amazing loss of identity. And it hurts. It hurt, number one, because I realized that my identity was tied up in my work so much. And I'd love to say that that's where the story ended and I cleaned all of that up and I never did it again. I did do it again. My next role, I had a little bit more balance, but my role after that is when I went into that insurance agency and I got completely out of balance again. It was my first C-suite title and I got right back into it. I've got, my output has to be so strong to deserve this title, instead of just the fact that I'm intelligent and I work hard and I'm a person with integrity and I'm worth this. I got really upside down. It cost me a lot. I lost balance in my life. So this is something that I've worked on over and over again, and I've continued to get better. But same thing, when I went out on my own, I've had to struggle with what does it mean to be a business owner? What does it mean to hold a brand? What does it mean to show up for my clients? What does all of that mean when it comes to also slowing down in life a little bit and finding my value, not in my output? So I've gone through seasons in my life where I've pushed hard, where I've lost rest, where I've compromised relationships greatly, where I've put my spirituality on the back burner. I've learned from that. I've reoriented, and I'm just recommending to you, I'm just begging you, honestly, to journal or to talk with someone that you trust about your thoughts about productivity and maybe where you want to pivot toward grace for yourself, toward balance and your true calling. This is a path that I'm still on, and I've come a really long way, but I didn't get here without a therapist, without my Reiki healer, without my licensed clinical therapist, without a psychiatrist at times, without a tapping coach, without a business coach. There have been a lot, without my best friends, without my family. There have been a lot of resources, books, podcasts, and the like that I've had to invest in to get to this healthier place. And I just encourage you to think about your production, the why behind it, and what you can do to give yourself some more grace in that area. Excellence is good, but only when it points us toward God and serving others and not our ego. And so if you take a look at your work and your success, I'm just challenging you to give yourself permission to pause, realign, and rest. The verse in Exodus 23 says, "You shall have no other gods before me." And I just want to challenge you to examine what's occupying the highest place in your heart. I recommend that you pick a guardrail to implement this week, because this is if you don't get intentional about working on this, then more time's just going to go by, right? We're just going to keep grinding. Whether that's scheduling a Sabbath rest, delegating one task, implementing one night at home where you're going to eat meals at home. I had to implement this. We had Thursday nights where we ate at home. Now we eat at home 5 to 6 nights a week. Not putting our phones on the table. There's tons of progress that you can make. Just pick one area and make some progress. And if you have gotten value out of this episode, I would love it if you'd follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. Leave me a review and reach out and tell me what you've done to help build boundaries for yourself or a healthy team culture in this way. And if you'd like to focus on your team culture in 2026 and really invest in the HR foundation of your business, but you're a small business owner and you're like, I'm not going to hire a full-time HR person. I don't need a full HR consultant. Then I recommend you get into HR in a Box. It's the most affordable way to work with me. It builds out a business foundation. You give me 6 or 12 months and we will make the biggest impact on your business. You can go to saltandlightadvisors.com/HR in a Box. Or if you want to be added to my weekly email newsletter on HR foundations, saltandlightadvisors.com/contact. I know that really determining what a healthy balance for us as professionals can be chaos, but this work is worth it. So don't waste the chaos. Embrace it. Until next time.